"Perhaps," said Marianne. "I may consider it with some surprise. Edward is very amiable, and I love him tenderly, but yet there is something wanting. His eyes want all that spirit which at once announce virtue and intelligence. And besides all this, I am afraid, mamma, he has no real taste. The more I know of the world, the more I am convinced that I shall never see a man whom I can really love. I require so much." "What a pity it is, Elinor," said Marianne, "that Edward should have no taste for drawing." "No taste for drawing," replied Elinor. "I hope you do not consider him as deficient in general taste." Marianne hardly knew what to say. She would not wound the feelings of her sister on any account, and yet to say what she did not believe was impossible. At length she replied, "Do not be offended, Elinor. I have the highest opinion in the world of his goodness and sense." "Of his sense and his goodness," replied Elinor, "no one can, I think, be in doubt. At present I know him so well that I think him really handsome, or at least almost so. What say you, Marianne?" "I shall very soon think him handsome, Elinor, if I do not now. When you tell me to love him as a brother, I shall no more see imperfection in his face than I now do in his heart." Elinor started at this declaration, and was sorry for the warmth she had been betrayed into in speaking of him. She felt that Edward stood very high in her opinion. She believed the regard to be mutual, but she required greater certainty of it to make Marianne's conviction of their attachment agreeable to her. She knew that what Marianne and her mother conjectured one moment, they believed the next. She was far from depending on his preference of her. Nay, the longer they were together, the more doubtful seemed the nature of his regard, and sometimes she believed it to be no more than friendship. But whatever might really be its limits, it was enough, when perceived by his sister, to make her uneasy, and at the same time to make her uncivil. She took the first opportunity of affronting her mother-in-law, talking to her so expressively of her brother's great expectations that Mrs. Dashwood could not endeavour to be calm. She gave her an answer which marked her contempt, and instantly left the room, resolving that, whatever might be the inconvenience or expense of so sudden a removal, her beloved Elinor should not be exposed another week to such insinuations. In this state of her spirits, a letter was delivered to her from the post, which contained a proposal particularly well timed. It was the offer of a small house on very easy terms, belonging to a relation of her own, a gentleman of consequence and property in Devonshire. She needed no time for deliberation or inquiry. To quit the neighbourhood of Norland was no longer an evil, it was a blessing. She instantly wrote to Sir John Middleton her acknowledgments of his kindness and her acceptance of his proposal. No sooner was her answer dispatched than Mrs. Dashwood indulged herself in the pleasure of announcing to her son-in-law and his wife that she was provided with a house, and should incommode them no longer than till everything were ready for her inhabiting it. Mrs. Dashwood took the house for a 12-month. It was ready furnished, and she might have immediate possession. No difficulty arose on either side of the agreement, and she waited only for the disposal of her effects at Norland, and to determine her future household before she set off for the West. In a very few weeks from the day which brought Sir John Middleton's first letter to Norland, everything was so far settled in their future abode as to enable Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters to begin their journey. As a house, Barton Cottage, though small, was comfortable and compact. But as a cottage it was defective, for the building was regular, the roof was tiled, the window shutters were not painted green, nor were the walls covered with honeysuckles. "Perhaps in the spring, if I have plenty of money, as I dare say I shall, we may think about building," announced Mrs. Dashwood. "These parlours are both too small for such parties of our friends as I hope to see often collected here." In the meantime, till all these alterations could be made, each of them was busy in arranging their particular concerns to form themselves a home. Marianne's pianoforte was unpacked and properly disposed of, and Elinor's drawings were affixed to the walls of their sitting-room. In such employments as these, they were interrupted soon after breakfast the next day by the entrance of their landlord. Sir John Middleton was a good-looking man about 40. His countenance was thoroughly good-humoured, and his manners were as friendly as the style of his letter. He pressed them so cordially to dine at Barton Park every day till they were better settled at home, that they could not give offence. Lady Middleton had sent a very civil message by him, denoting her intention of waiting on Mrs. Dashwood, as soon as she could be assured that her visit would be no inconvenience, and as this message was answered by an invitation equally polite, her ladyship was introduced to them the next day.